millionaire CEO went to an elite clinic to see his fiancée and found his ex at the reception with little girls who looked like him. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's family. May the Almighty pour His purest light upon you, filling your lives with peace that calms every storm and strength that rises even in silence. May every woman be wrapped in honor, protected by grace, and lifted with a power that never asks for permission to shine. You are the heartbeat of families, the quiet courage behind every miracle, the love that holds the world together when no one is watching. I pray your bodies are guarded with health, your hearts softened with hope, and your homes sealed with harmony. May your tears be counted and turned into blessings, your sacrifices rewarded with comfort, and your prayers answered in ways more beautiful than you imagined. May love follow you, respect surround you, and joy find you again and again. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." Jackie Robinson stood in the marble lobby of Lumiere Medical Center with his fiancée's hand in his, planning their future, when the woman behind the reception desk lifted her head, and he saw the face that had been haunting his dreams for 6 years, and then 2 little girls with his own eyes walked through the door calling her Mama. Time fractured into before and after. The woman was Althea Gibson, and she looked more beautiful than memory allowed. Her natural hair twisted into elegant locks that framed a face he used to trace with his fingers in the dark. She wore a designer suit that spoke of success, her posture straight as steel, and when their eyes met across the lobby, her expression held absolutely no surprise. She knew he was coming. She had been waiting for this moment, and the realization hit Jackie like a fist to his chest, because it meant she had planned this confrontation with the precision of someone who had spent years preparing for war. The twins stopped in the doorway when they saw him, their small bodies going rigid with shock. They couldn't have been older than 5, with skin that blended both his and Althea's tones into something luminous, his dimpled chin replicated perfectly on both faces, his smile structure, his bone architecture. Cheryl was taller by inches, bold in her stance, even while frozen. Alice stood slightly behind her sister, quieter but with eyes that missed nothing, and both of them looked at Jackie with an expression that destroyed him because it was recognition mixed with longing, mixed with confusion, as if some part of them had been waiting their entire lives for this moment without understanding why. Jackie's fiancée Felicity continued chattering beside him, oblivious to the earthquake happening in his chest, talking about her fertility treatments and timelines and future plans that suddenly felt like they belonged to a completely different life. Althea's voice cut through the noise like a blade when she told them to sign the visitor log, her tone professionally arctic, her hand steady as she pushed the clipboard across the marble counter. She didn't offer explanation or emotion or acknowledgement of what they had been to each other. She simply processed them like any other patient's, her face a mask of controlled professionalism that Jackie recognized as the armor she wore when she was protecting herself from devastation. Felicity pulled him toward the elevator, still talking, still planning, still existing in a reality where Jackie's entire world hadn't just detonated. He looked back and saw Althea bend down to whisper something to the girls, both of them immediately turning to stare at him with increased intensity, their small faces showing a complexity of emotion that children that young shouldn't have been capable of expressing. The elevator doors began to close, and Jackie watched Althea stand back up, one hand on each daughter's shoulder, her expression shifting for just a fraction of a second into something raw and painful before the steel mask returned and the doors sealed him away from them. The elevator ride lasted an eternity. Felicity kept talking, but Jackie couldn't hear her anymore, couldn't process anything except the knowledge crashing through him in waves. Althea had disappeared 6 years ago without warning, without explanation, vanishing from his life so completely that he'd hired investigators who found nothing, spent months trying to understand what he'd done wrong, eventually forced himself to move on because staying broken wasn't sustainable. And now he understood why the investigators found nothing. She hadn't been running from danger or circumstance. She had chosen to disappear, had planned it, had executed it with the kind of thoroughness that suggested she never wanted to be found. But she had been pregnant. She had been carrying his children when she vanished, had given birth to them somewhere he couldn't find her, had raised them for 5 years in a life he knew nothing about. The questions were overwhelming. Why had she left? Why had she never told him about the twins? Why was she working here at this specific clinic, where his fiancée was a patient? The coincidence was impossible, which meant it wasn't coincidence at all. Althea had orchestrated this meeting, had positioned herself perfectly to force this confrontation. And Jackie couldn't understand why now, why this way, why with such calculated cruelty. Unless it wasn't cruelty, unless it was something else entirely, something he couldn't see yet because he was still drowning in shock. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out with shaking hands. Unknown number. The message contained a single photo that made his heart stop completely. It was him and Althea from 6 years ago, taken in his penthouse on a Sunday morning, both of them laughing at something, her hand resting on her stomach, in a gesture he hadn't understood at the time, but now read completely differently. She had already known she was pregnant when that photo was taken. She had already been making plans to leave, and beneath the photo was a message that felt like accusation and invitation simultaneously. 7 words that rewrote everything he thought he understood about their ending. They deserved to know the man who didn't choose them. Jackie stared at those words until they blurred, until Felicity's voice finally penetrated his consciousness, demanding to know what was wrong, until the elevator doors opened onto the fertility clinic's floor, and he had to make a choice about what happened next. But there was no choice. Not really, because those 2 little girls with his face had just become the center of his universe, and the woman who had hidden them from him for 5 years had just declared war. He needed to understand why Althea had left, why she had taken his daughters away from him, why she was letting him find them now. He needed answers, and he needed them immediately, but something told him that Althea Gibson wasn't going to make getting those answers easy. She had spent 6 years building walls around herself and their daughters, and if Jackie wanted the truth, he was going to have to fight for every piece of it. The message on his phone burned like a brand. They deserved to know the man who didn't choose them. But Jackie hadn't chosen anything because he hadn't known there was a choice to make, and that difference mattered, except maybe it didn't matter to Althea at all. Maybe in her mind his ignorance was just another form of abandonment, and maybe she was right. Maybe he should have fought harder to find her when she disappeared. Maybe he should have known something was desperately wrong instead of eventually accepting her absence and moving on with his life. Maybe he had failed her and their daughters in ways he couldn't see yet, and this confrontation she had orchestrated was his reckoning for all of it. Jackie closed his eyes and saw those 2 little girls staring at him, and knew with absolute certainty that nothing in his life would ever be the same again. Chapter 2. The Woman Who Disappeared on Purpose. Jackie Robinson could not breathe through Felicity's appointment, could not focus, could not pretend that the foundation of his existence hadn't just cracked wide open and swallowed everything he thought he understood about his own history. The doctor talked about hormones and cycles and optimal timing, while Felicity took notes with her usual efficient precision, planning their future family with the same organizational skills she applied to her corporate law practice, and Jackie sat there realizing he already had a family, already had children, already had everything they were trying to create, except he'd been excluded from it by the woman who had once promised him forever. When the appointment finally ended and Felicity suggested lunch, Jackie manufactured an excuse about emergency business calls and watched relief flash across her face, because she had been irritated with his distraction, had been cataloguing his failures throughout the appointment with the same sharp attention she applied to depositions. The moment Felicity's car left the parking garage, Jackie returned to the clinic's reception area. Althea was gone. The desk was staffed by a younger woman who looked at him with professional courtesy and told him that Ms. Gibson had left early for personal reasons, but Dr. Simone Carr, the clinic director, was waiting to speak with him if he went to the 4th floor administrative offices. The phrasing made it clear this wasn't coincidence either. Someone had been expecting him to return, had been planning for this exact sequence of events, and Jackie felt like he was moving through a script written by people who understood him better than he understood himself. Dr. Carr's office was all windows and chrome, modern and coldly beautiful, and the woman behind the desk radiated the kind of confidence that came from decades of holding people's most desperate hopes in her hands. She was older than Althea, maybe late 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that assessed Jackie like he was a problem to be solved. She didn't offer pleasantries or small talk. She simply told him that Althea had left work early, and then she said something that detonated what remained of Jackie's understanding of the past 6 years. She didn't disappear, Mr. Robinson. She made a choice to vanish, and she had her reasons, good reasons, reasons that might make you look at yourself differently if you had the courage to hear them. Jackie demanded to know what that meant, demanded explanations, demanded answers to the 1,000 questions tearing through him, but Dr. Carr just smiled with something that looked like pity and handed him an envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper with an address written in Althea's distinctive handwriting and a time, 9 o'clock tonight, come alone. No explanation, no context, just coordinates for a meeting that felt like walking into an ambush, except Jackie was going to walk into it anyway because those 2 little girls deserved more than a father who disappeared from ignorance. He drove home to the penthouse he shared with Felicity and found her in the living room with her laptop, already working on briefs for tomorrow's court appearance, her mind completely divorced from their appointment and his obvious distress. When Jackie told her he needed to talk, told her about Althea and the twins and the 6 years of hidden truth, Felicity's response was everything he needed to understand about the woman he had almost married. She didn't react with shock or compassion or concern. She shifted immediately into lawyer mode, talking about custody arrangements and financial settlements and reputation management, discussing his daughters like they were a legal problem to be contained, rather than human beings who deserved love and presence. The mercenary coldness of her response crystallized something Jackie had been avoiding for months. He didn't love Felicity. He had chosen her because she was safe and appropriate and demanded nothing from his heart, had drifted into their engagement because it seemed like the logical next step for a man who had already lost the love of his life and didn't believe in getting second chances. But watching her calculate the most efficient way to minimize the damage of his secret children, seeing her discuss Cheryl and Alice like they were liabilities to be managed, Jackie understood that marrying this woman would be a betrayal of everyone involved. He ended the engagement in Felicity's living room, his voice steady and final, and watched her face transform from shock to cold fury in seconds. She called him selfish and impulsive, accused him of throwing away their future for a woman who had already abandoned him once, predicted that he would regret this decision when Althea broke him again. Maybe she was right. Maybe Althea would destroy him completely this time. But those 2 little girls with his face deserved better than a father who chose the easy path. And Jackie had already spent 6 years taking the coward's route by moving on instead of fighting harder to find the woman he loved. Felicity demanded he leave immediately, her voice sharp with wounded pride, and Jackie packed a bag and walked out of that penthouse knowing he would never return, knowing that every plan he had made for his future had just become irrelevant, knowing that his real life was waiting for him at the address written in Althea's handwriting. At 9 o'clock, Jackie stood in front of a beautiful townhouse in an expensive neighborhood that spoke of success and careful planning and a life built from nothing while he had been across the city building his empire in ignorance. The architecture was elegant without being ostentatious, the kind of place that required serious income to maintain, and Jackie realized that Althea hadn't just survived the past 6 years. She had thrived. She had built something substantial, had created a home for their daughters, had succeeded without his help or his money or his presence, and the realization was both humbling and devastating, because it meant she truly hadn't needed him. Althea answered the door before he could knock, as if she had been watching for his arrival, waiting for this moment with the same intensity he had been carrying all day. She wore casual clothes now, jeans and a soft sweater that made her look younger and more vulnerable than the armored professional from the clinic, but her eyes held the same steel. She looked at him for a long moment that stretched between them like all the years and all the questions and all the pain neither of them had processed. And then she spoke the words that changed everything. You want to know why I left? Come inside and I'll show you exactly what you abandoned. Jackie followed her into a living room that should have felt warm, but instead felt like a mausoleum, and understood why when he saw the walls. Every surface was covered with photographs of Cheryl and Alice at every age, from newborn to present, creating a timeline of everything he had missed. First smiles and first steps and first days of school, birthday parties and holiday mornings, and ordinary moments that should have included him, but didn't. A visual representation of 5 years stolen from him by the woman standing beside him with her arms crossed and her spine rigid. In the center of the room was a large screen frozen on an image that made Jackie's heart stop completely. Althea in a hospital bed, visibly pregnant, hooked to machines that beeped and monitored and kept her alive, looking directly at the camera with hollow eyes and a message written on a whiteboard in her lap, in shaky handwriting that must have cost her everything to produce. "Jackie, if you ever see this, know that I chose to protect you from this hell." Althea picked up a remote and pressed play, and Jackie Robinson discovered exactly what she had protected him from, and exactly what that protection had cost them both. Chapter 3. The Hell She Chose Alone. The video showed Althea 6 years younger, her voice weak but determined, her face showing the kind of exhaustion that came from bodies pushed past their limits into territories where survival became a choice rather than a given. She explained that she had collapsed in her apartment 8 weeks pregnant, had woken in an emergency room hemorrhaging from complications she couldn't pronounce through the morphine haze, had been told by doctors in calm professional voices that continuing the pregnancy would likely kill her. The medical terminology washed over Jackie in waves he couldn't process: placental abruption, disseminated intravascular coagulation, risk of stroke, risk of organ failure, risk of death climbing with every week she tried to carry the babies toward viability. The doctors had given her a choice that wasn't really a choice at all: terminate immediately and save herself, or gamble everything on reaching 28 weeks when the twins might survive outside her failing body. In the video, Althea talked directly to the camera like she was talking to Jackie, her words slurred from medication, but her meaning devastatingly clear. She told him she had chosen to fight for the pregnancy, had chosen to risk death for children he didn't know existed, and then she told him why she hadn't called him, why she had made that choice alone in a hospital room while he was across the city celebrating his company's successful launch. She said she knew exactly what would happen if she told him. He would abandon the business at its most critical moment, would destroy everything they had built together, would eventually come to resent her for the sacrifice whether he admitted it or not. More than that, she needed to know he could succeed without her, that his love wasn't just dependence masquerading as devotion. The video showed shots of Jackie on television in the background, laughing at the IPO celebration she hadn't attended, giving interviews about his company's success, looking happy and unburdened, and completely unaware that the woman he loved was dying in a hospital bed fighting to give him children he didn't know he had created. Althea's voice on the video pointed this out without accusation, just stated it as fact, and somehow that made it worse. She told the camera she was glad he was happy, glad he was succeeding, glad he was moving forward with his life, while she hemorrhaged and suffered because at least one of them got to be free. Althea stopped the video there, her hand steady on the remote, and finished the story in person, with her voice hard as diamonds and her eyes showing nothing but controlled fury. She told Jackie the rest in brutal detail. 3 times the doctors thought she would die. 3 times they prepared him for the worst, except there was no him to prepare because she had chosen to do this alone, had forged medical power of attorney documents naming Dr. Carr as her representative, had made plans for the twins to be adopted if she died, because she refused to burden Jackie with children born from her corpse. She told him about giving birth at 28 weeks, about the emergency surgery that saved the twins but left her hemorrhaging from her brain, about waking from a 6-day coma to discover she had daughters and couldn't remember their names through the fog of brain damage. She told him about 3 months in hospital recovering, while Cheryl and Alice fought for survival in the NICU, about returning to an empty apartment with premature twins and a body that barely functioned, about working minimum wage jobs because her medical bills had destroyed her savings and she refused to take charity. Althea told him about the first year surviving on nothing but determination and fury, about the second year slowly building something better, about the third year finally achieving stability. She told him that by the time she was strong enough to consider reaching out, Jackie was already being photographed at charity events with other women, already moving on with his life the way she had told herself she wanted him to. She told him she saw those photos and made the decision to stay, disappeared because he had clearly chosen his path, and she refused to complicate it with guilt and obligation. The cruelty of her logic was breathtaking, and Jackie tried to protest, tried to explain that he would have chosen her, would have chosen their daughters, would have abandoned everything if he had known. But Althea cut him off with a laugh that held no humor at all. She told him that was exactly why she hadn't told him, because she didn't want to be chosen out of obligation or guilt or masculine responsibility. She wanted him to choose his dreams freely, wanted him to succeed on his own merit, wanted him to live without the weight of her dying body dragging down his ambitions. Jackie felt like he was being flayed alive by every word, felt like his skin was being peeled away in strips to expose something raw and guilty underneath, except he hadn't done anything wrong. He hadn't known. He couldn't have helped because she had deliberately hidden from him, had made the choice to suffer alone, had stolen his chance to be there for her and their daughters because of some twisted logic about protection and freedom that made sense to no one but her. He told her this, his voice rising with anger for the first time, told her she had no right to make that choice for him, no right to decide he was better off ignorant, no right to exclude him from his own children's lives. Althea's smile was bitter and beautiful when she told him he was right. She had no right, but she had done it anyway because watching him succeed gave her something to hold on to during the month she spent fighting to survive. She told him that every time she saw him in a magazine or on television looking happy and accomplished, she told herself the suffering was worth it because at least he got to live freely. She told him that twisted logic was the only thing that kept her alive through the worst moments, and maybe it was selfish, and maybe it was cruel, but it was also the truth, and he could hate her for it if he wanted, but he couldn't change it. Jackie asked the question burning through him like acid. If you wanted me to be free, why did you let me find you now? Why orchestrate this confrontation? Why not just stay disappeared? Althea's expression shifted into something raw and painful, and when she spoke, her voice finally showed cracks in the armor she had been maintaining since he walked into the clinic. She told him that Cheryl and Alice had been asking about their father for 2 years, had been begging to know who he was and why he wasn't there, and she was tired of lying to protect him from questions he deserved to answer himself. She told him she had spent 6 years building walls around herself and their daughters, but those walls were hurting the girls now, and she loved them too much to keep lying about why they didn't have a father. More than that, Althea told him something that changed the entire conversation. She told him she had always planned to tell him eventually, had always known this day would come, but she needed him to find them, rather than her reaching out because she needed to see what he would do with the information. She needed to watch him process the shock and make choices about what happened next, needed to see if he would fight for his daughters or treat them like an inconvenient complication to be managed with money and distance. Jackie stared at this woman who had survived hell and come out stronger, this woman who had hidden his children from him for 6 years and now stood before him demanding he prove himself worthy of them, and understood with devastating clarity that Althea Gibson no longer needed him for anything. She had built a complete life without him, had raised their daughters alone, had succeeded and thrived and created something beautiful from the ashes of her own near death. And his presence now was optional rather than essential. The power dynamic had completely reversed from what it had been 6 years ago, and if Jackie wanted to be part of his daughters' lives, he was going to have to earn it on Althea's terms. He asked her what those terms were, his voice steadier than he felt, and Althea told him the answer that would define everything that came after. "You can meet Cheryl and Alice tomorrow." supervised, limited, on my conditions. And if you hurt them even slightly, I will make you disappear from their lives so completely you'll feel like you never existed at all. Chapter 4. The Daughters Who Test Him. Jackie Robinson arrived at the family counseling center the next afternoon, feeling like he was walking to his own execution, and in a way he was, because these two little girls held the power to destroy him more completely than any business deal or corporate betrayal ever could. The center was designed to be non-threatening, all soft colors and comfortable furniture and toys scattered strategically to put children at ease. But Jackie couldn't focus on any of it because Althea was already there with Cheryl and Alice, the three of them sitting together on a sofa like a complete unit that didn't need him. The girls wore matching sundresses in different colors, their hair styled in intricate braids that must have taken Althea hours to complete, and they looked at him with identical expressions of suspicious curiosity that pierced straight through his chest. The session supervisor, a kind-faced woman who introduced herself as Beverly, explained the rules in a gentle voice. 1 hour, supervised interaction, no promises beyond today, focus on getting to know each other slowly, and then she stepped back and left Jackie to face his daughters alone under Althea's watchful gaze. Cheryl spoke first, because apparently boldness was her defining trait, her voice clear and direct in a way that reminded him devastatingly of Althea. She asked him why he hadn't been there when they were born, why he hadn't helped their mama when she was sick, why he had left them. The accusations came rapid fire from a 5-year-old mouth, and each one hit Jackie like a physical blow because there was no good answer, no way to explain that he hadn't known they existed without making it sound like an excuse. He tried to tell them the truth, that their mother hadn't told him about them, but even as the words left his mouth, he realized how hollow they sounded. Whether he had known or not, the result was the same. 5 years of absence. 5 years of their mother doing everything alone. 5 years of birthdays and milestones and ordinary moments he had missed forever. Alice was quieter than her sister, but somehow more devastating, waiting until Cheryl finished her interrogation before asking the question that destroyed Jackie completely. She wanted to know if he was going to leave again after today. Her voice so small and careful, it was clear she was protecting herself from the answer, expecting abandonment because it was the only thing her limited experience had taught her to expect from the concept of fathers. Jackie tried to promise he wouldn't leave, tried to tell her he wanted to be part of their lives, but he could see in her eyes that she didn't believe him. Why should she? He was a stranger making promises, and they had learned from their mother's example that adults could survive anything without help, that needing people was weakness. The hour was torture. Every question felt like a test Jackie was failing. Every silence felt loaded with judgment. Every glance between the twins felt like communication he couldn't decode. He tried to learn about them, asked about their favorite things and their school and their friends, but their answers were guarded and minimal, giving him nothing substantial to hold on to. Cheryl remained suspicious and challenging throughout, testing him with increasingly difficult questions about where he had been and why he hadn't found them sooner. Alice watched everything with those quiet, assessing eyes, saying little but missing nothing, and Jackie got the sense she was cataloguing his responses to review later with her sister. When Beverly announced the session was ending, both girls left without hugging him or showing any affection, just walked to their mother like magnets returning to true north, and Jackie watched them go, feeling like he had just failed the most important test of his life. Althea's expression told him he had performed exactly as poorly as she had expected, her face showing a mixture of vindication and disappointment that made him want to rage at the impossible standards she was holding him to. How was he supposed to build trust with children who had been taught they didn't need anyone but their mother? How was he supposed to compete with 6 years of Althea's strength and independence? How was he supposed to prove he wouldn't abandon them when they had already decided abandonment was inevitable? As they were leaving, Beverly pulled Jackie aside and told him something that shifted his entire understanding of the session. She said that after they had left the room, Alice had asked when they could see him again, that despite the guards and the suspicion and the fear, something in that little girl wanted her father. Beverly told Jackie that children who asked that question were children who were hoping to be proven wrong about abandonment, and he should take it as the small opening it was and push through despite how much it hurt. Jackie drove home to a hotel room instead of a penthouse, sat on the bed with his head in his hands, and tried to process everything that had happened in the past day. He had lost his fiancée, discovered he had daughters, learned that the woman he loved had nearly died alone, and failed to convince his children he was worth trusting, all in less than 24 hours. The exhaustion was overwhelming, but Jackie couldn't sleep, because his phone had buzzed with a new message from the unknown number that had sent him that first photograph, and this one was somehow worse. It was a video of Althea in the hospital 6 years ago, barely conscious and hooked to machines, her lips moving weakly as she spoke to someone off camera. The audio was muffled, but Jackie could make out fragments. "If I don't survive this, tell Jackie I never blamed him for living his life. Tell him I loved him enough to let him go. Tell him the girls are named Cheryl and Alice and they have his smile." The video cut off abruptly, and below it was a message that hit Jackie like a freight train. "She protected you from this. She nearly died protecting you from guilt and obligation. And you moved on to easier women and easier lives while she hemorrhaged and suffered. What kind of man does that make you?" Jackie stared at those words until they blurred, until anger and guilt and confusion twisted together into something he couldn't name, until he understood that someone else knew the full story of what Althea had endured, someone who had been there during her darkest moments, someone who was now making sure Jackie understood exactly what his ignorance had cost. The video felt like both accusation and invitation, showing him what he had missed while simultaneously suggesting he didn't deserve to know, and Jackie realized that whoever was sending these messages was testing him just as thoroughly as his daughters had been. He saved the video and the message, added them to the first photo in a folder he titled Reckoning, and understood that this was just the beginning. Someone was going to make sure he saw every moment of what Althea had survived, was going to force him to confront every aspect of her suffering, and Jackie was going to have to endure it because his daughters deserved a father who understood what their mother had sacrificed for them. The question was whether he would survive the education or whether the weight of all that pain would crush him before he earned the right to be called Daddy. Chapter 5. The Enemy Inside Her Walls. Jackie Robinson became obsessed with finding out who was sending him these messages, not because he wanted them to stop, but because he needed to understand who else knew the full story of what Althea had endured, and why they were choosing now to force him to confront it. He hired a private investigator who came back 3 days later with nothing useful, telling Jackie that whoever was behind the messages was using sophisticated encryption and routing protocols that suggested either serious technical knowledge or serious resources, or both. The digital trail was ghost clean, deliberately erased, and the investigator's professional opinion was that this person didn't want to be found unless they chose to reveal themselves. Jackie paid the man and sent him away, frustrated but not surprised, because everything about this situation felt controlled and deliberate, like he was moving through a maze designed by someone who understood him better than he understood himself. Meanwhile, he continued the supervised visits with Cheryl and Alice, showing up every week at the family center with his heart in his throat and hope fighting despair in his chest. The sessions were incrementally less hostile than the first, small progressions that might have been meaningful, except they felt so agonizingly slow. Cheryl tested him slightly less viciously, her questions becoming more curious than accusatory, asking about his childhood and his work and his life in ways that suggested she was building a picture of who he was beyond the father who wasn't there. Alice remained quieter, but occasionally smiled at something he said, tiny breakthroughs that Jackie treasured like diamonds because they suggested she was beginning to believe he might stay. By the fourth visit, something fragile was forming between them, trust so delicate it could shatter with one wrong word, and Jackie was terrified every moment that he would say or do something that would destroy it. Then disaster arrived in the form of clinic politics and someone else's cruelty, and Jackie discovered that building a relationship with his daughters was going to be even harder than he had imagined. He arrived at the family center to find Althea in the lobby with Dr. Simone Carr, both of them looking devastated in ways that made Jackie's heart immediately start racing with fear. The visits were cancelled, Althea told him in a voice barely holding together, and when Jackie demanded to know why, the explanation was worse than anything he had imagined. Someone had leaked information about him being the twins' father to the clinic's board of directors, and now there were questions about conflicts of interest because his former fiancée, Felicity, was still a patient there. The political maneuvering was vicious and transparent. Someone wanted to damage either Althea's position at the clinic or Jackie's relationship with his daughters, or both, and they had chosen the most effective weapon to do maximum harm. Jackie felt rage ignite in his chest, the kind of fury that came from watching innocent people suffer because of someone else's malice, and he demanded to know who was responsible. Dr. Carr told him they were still investigating, but the leak had come from someone with inside knowledge of both the clinic and Jackie's business dealings, which narrowed the suspect pool significantly. Jackie immediately thought of his company's board members, several of whom had expressed concern about the distraction of his personal life affecting his business focus, and one in particular who had made pointed comments about maintaining appropriate boundaries between professional and personal matters. Within 2 hours, Jackie had traced the leak back to one of his board members, a man who had been with the company since its earliest days, and who apparently had opinions about Jackie's fitness to lead, given the scandal of secret children and broken engagements. The confrontation happened in the boardroom with the entire executive team present, and Jackie didn't bother with subtlety or corporate diplomacy. He laid out the evidence, detailed exactly how this man had violated both company policy and basic human decency, and then he fired him on the spot with such finality that everyone in the room understood there would be no discussion or appeal. The decision cost Jackie politically within his own company, burned bridges with other board members who thought he was overreacting, potentially damaged business relationships that had taken years to build. He made the choice anyway, and made it publicly, issuing a statement that anyone who had problems with his commitment to his daughters could leave with the same level of ceremony, and the message was devastatingly clear. His children came first, always, regardless of professional consequences. Althea heard about the firing before Jackie could tell her himself, because it made business news within hours, and when he arrived at the clinic that evening, she was waiting outside with an expression he couldn't read. She told him the leak investigation was over. The board had cleared her of any wrongdoing, and the visits could resume. Then she stood there looking at him with something shifting in her eyes, some crack appearing in the armor she had maintained so carefully since he found them, and Jackie understood that watching him burn his professional bridges for their daughters had affected her in ways she wasn't ready to acknowledge. She didn't thank him, or soften toward him, or give him anything except a slight nod before she turned to leave, but something had changed, and they both knew it. For the first time since this began, Althea had seen him choose his daughters over everything else, had watched him sacrifice business relationships and political capital and professional reputation for the sake of children he had only known for weeks, and the decision had spoken louder than any promises he could have made with words. Jackie drove back to his hotel, feeling like maybe he had passed some test he hadn't known he was taking, like maybe Althea was beginning to see that he meant what he said about being present for their daughters, like maybe the walls she had built weren't quite as impenetrable as they had seemed. The feeling lasted until his phone buzzed with another message from the unknown sender, and this one changed everything again. It was a photo taken in a delivery room. Althea unconscious on a surgical table, surrounded by doctors. Blood everywhere, monitors showing numbers Jackie didn't understand but knew were bad, and in the corner was a medical notation with timestamps and details about life-threatening hemorrhaging and decisions made in crisis. Below the photo was a message that made Jackie's blood run cold. Good. Now you're beginning to understand what she sacrificed. But you still don't know the worst part. Ask her about the choice she made in the delivery room when they told her they could only save one. Jackie stared at those words until the phone screen went dark, until he understood that whatever he thought he knew about Althea's suffering was incomplete, until he realized that the woman he loved had been forced to make a choice no human being should ever have to make, and she had carried that knowledge alone for 6 years while he lived in ignorance. The next morning, Jackie showed up at the clinic before it opened and waited for Althea in the parking garage, and when she arrived and saw his face, she knew immediately that someone had told him about the delivery room, and her armor finally cracked wide open. Chapter 6. The Choice That Defines Everything. Althea Gibson stood in the parking garage looking at Jackie with an expression that moved through anger and resignation and exhaustion before settling on something that looked like relief, as if she had been carrying this secret alone for so long that having it exposed was almost a gift despite the pain. She told him to get in her car because this conversation couldn't happen in public, and Jackie climbed into the passenger seat of her well-maintained sedan and waited while she gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles and tried to find words for something that clearly still lived in her nightmares. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but every word landed like a hammer blow to Jackie's chest, shattering what remained of his innocence about what she had endured. Althea told him that when she went into premature labor at 28 weeks, the doctors had discovered that both twins were in distress, their heart rates dropping into dangerous territories, and her body was hemorrhaging in ways that suggested catastrophic failure of multiple systems. The medical team had pulled her attending physician aside and told him the brutal truth. They could save one baby safely if they acted immediately, but trying to save both would risk losing all 3 of them, including Althea. The doctor had come to her bedside and told her she needed to choose which daughter lived, had actually asked her to choose between Cheryl and Alice, in a moment when she was bleeding and terrified and barely conscious from pain. The words came out of Althea in fragments, her breathing shallow and her face showing the kind of trauma that never fully healed. And Jackie listened with his own breathing, stopped because he couldn't imagine the horror of what she was describing. She told him she had refused to choose, had told the doctors through gritted teeth that they saved both her daughters or they saved neither, had threatened to refuse all treatment if they didn't at least try. The medical team had tried to reason with her, had explained the risks, had told her she was likely condemning all 3 of them to death with her stubbornness. But Althea had been beyond reason by that point. She had spent months fighting to keep these babies alive, had survived complications that should have killed her, had endured pain and fear and isolation beyond anything Jackie could imagine, and she was not going to choose between her daughters in the final moments. So she had gambled everything on a refusal, had bet her life and both babies' lives on doctors who didn't want that responsibility, and by some miracle, it had worked. The surgical team had saved both twins through emergency procedures that pushed medical protocols to their limits, but the cost to Althea had been catastrophic. She had suffered massive hemorrhaging during the delivery, had a stroke on the operating table from blood clots in her brain, had gone into cardiac arrest and been resuscitated, and then had slipped into a coma that lasted 6 days while her daughters fought for survival in the NICU. Althea told Jackie that she woke from the coma with no memory of the past week, couldn't remember her own name for the first 2 days, had to relearn how to walk because the stroke had affected her motor control, and spent another month in hospital beds while her brain healed and her body slowly remembered how to function without machines keeping it alive. During that month, Cheryl and Alice were in incubators fighting their own battles for survival, tiny premature babies that Althea could only visit in a wheelchair when the nurses took pity on her and broke regulations to push her to the NICU. She told him about the first time she held them 8 weeks after giving birth, when they were finally stable enough for skin-to-skin contact, and how she had sat in that hospital room with both daughters against her chest and understood with devastating clarity that she was strong enough to protect them alone, that she didn't need Jackie or anyone else because she had just survived the unsurvivable. The realization had been both empowering and heartbreaking, because it meant accepting that she would raise them without him, would build a life from nothing, would carry all of this alone because she had already proven she could. Jackie sat in that car, feeling like his skin had been peeled away to expose every nerve ending, feeling the weight of what Althea had endured crushing him under impossible knowledge, and he couldn't find words because what words existed for this? What could he say that would mean anything compared to what she had survived? He tried to apologize and Althea cut him off with a bitter laugh, told him she didn't want his apologies because they changed nothing, told him the past was fixed and immutable, and all the regret in the world couldn't alter the fact that she had nearly died alone while he lived freely. Jackie asked her the question burning through him, despite knowing the answer would hurt. What do I have to do to prove I deserve to be in their lives? What do I have to do to make up for not being there even though I didn't know? Althea looked at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering and said the words that would define everything that came after. Nothing you do now can change the past. You can only show up for the future, and I don't know if that's enough. I don't know if I can ever trust you not to leave when things get hard, because I've learned that people always leave when things get hard, and I won't let Cheryl and Alice learn that same lesson from their father. She told him the truth she had been protecting since he found them. She was terrified that he would stay until the novelty wore off and then disappear. Terrified that he would treat their daughters like an obligation instead of a privilege. Terrified that he would break their hearts the way hers had been broken by circumstance and distance and the cruel mathematics of survival. Terrified that loving him again would destroy her because she had built herself back from nothing once and didn't know if she had the strength to do it a second time. Jackie reached for her hand and was devastated when she pulled away, when she told him she couldn't do this right now, couldn't process him being here and knowing everything and looking at her like she was something precious instead of something broken. She started the car and told him to get out, her voice rough with unshed tears, and Jackie stood in the parking garage watching her drive away and understood that learning the truth hadn't brought them closer. It had just shown him exactly how deep the chasm between them went, exactly how much pain she had survived alone, exactly how impossible it was going to be to bridge that distance. His phone rang before he made it to his own car, and Jackie answered without looking at the number because everything felt surreal and distant. Althea's voice came through the speaker, rough with terror, telling him to meet her at the emergency room immediately, telling him something was wrong with Alice, telling him to drive carefully but hurry because their daughter had collapsed at school and the doctors were running tests and she needed him there, even if she didn't want to need him there, and Jackie drove through the city with his heart in his throat, understanding that their reckoning was about to become something even more devastating. Chapter 7. The crisis that reveals who they are. Jackie Robinson arrived at the hospital emergency room to find Althea in the waiting area with Cheryl pressed against her side, both of them looking shell-shocked and terrified in ways that made every instinct in his body scream to fix this, to protect them, to make whatever was wrong with Alice disappear through sheer force of will. Althea looked up when he arrived, and something in her face shifted, some wall she had been maintaining crumbling in the face of crisis, and she told him in a voice barely holding together that Alice had collapsed during recess at school. The 5-year-old had been playing normally one moment and unconscious on the ground the next, and by the time the school nurse reached her, she was bleeding from her nose and struggling to breathe. The ambulance had brought her here where doctors were now running emergency tests for causes. But Althea already knew what they were going to find because she had lived this nightmare before, had survived this exact crisis, and the generational repetition of it was destroying her. A doctor emerged from the emergency area and confirmed what Althea had feared. Alice was showing symptoms of the same blood clotting disorder that had nearly killed her mother during pregnancy. The condition was genetic, could manifest at any time during childhood, and required immediate aggressive treatment to prevent strokes or organ damage. Alice was stable for now, but would need to stay in the hospital for extensive testing and treatment planning, and there were risks the doctor outlined in careful clinical language that translated to, "Your daughter could die from this." Cheryl started crying when she understood that her twin was seriously ill, asking questions through tears about whether Alice was going to disappear like other kids who went to hospitals and didn't come back. And Jackie watched Althea trying to hold her remaining daughter together while clearly falling apart internally. He stepped in without asking permission, pulling Cheryl into his arms and letting her sob against his chest while he told her that her sister was strong like their mother, that the doctors knew how to help, that Alice was going to be fine because their family didn't give up when things got hard. The words were promises he couldn't guarantee, but Cheryl needed to hear them, needed someone to be certain when everything felt uncertain, and Jackie gave her that certainty even as his own fear threatened to drown him. The first night in the hospital was endless. Cheryl finally cried herself to sleep in a chair beside Alice's bed, one small hand reaching through the rails to hold her twins' fingers, and Jackie stayed with both girls while Althea met with doctors to discuss treatment plans. When she returned hours later, she looked like she had aged a decade, her face showing the kind of exhaustion that came from reliving trauma, and Jackie understood that she was back in that delivery room, making impossible choices, back in those months of hospitalization, fighting to survive, back in all the worst moments of her life, because her daughter was now living them. He found Althea in the hallway outside Alice's room at 3 in the morning, sitting on the floor with her head in her hands and her breathing coming too fast, and Jackie recognized a panic attack in progress. He sat beside her without speaking, just put his hand on her back and breathed slowly and steadily until she started matching his rhythm, until the hyperventilation eased and she could think again. When she finally looked at him, her eyes were devastated and raw in ways that stripped away every defense she had been maintaining. She told him she couldn't do this again, couldn't watch another person she loved suffer from this condition, couldn't survive another crisis like the one that had nearly killed her. She told him about the PTSD that lived in her body, about the nightmares that still woke her some nights, about the guilt that she had passed this genetic curse to her daughter. She told him that every decision she had made 6 years ago was about protecting people from this exactly pain. And now Alice was suffering anyway, despite everything Althea had sacrificed. And what was the point of all that suffering if she couldn't even protect her children from inheriting her broken genetics? Jackie held her while she shattered, held her while she sobbed against his chest and said things she would probably regret telling him later, held her while the walls she had spent 6 years building came down completely under the weight of watching her daughter in a hospital bed. He told her she hadn't failed Alice or Cheryl, that this condition wasn't her fault, that genetics were cruel and random and not something she could have prevented. He told her she was the strongest person he had ever known and their daughters were lucky to have her. And he promised her something that felt both natural and terrifying. He promised he wouldn't let her do this alone, that he was here for all of it, that she could lean on him because he wasn't going anywhere. Althea pulled back and looked at him with an expression he couldn't read, and for a moment Jackie thought she was going to tell him she didn't need his help, was going to rebuild her walls and shut him out the way she had been doing since he found them. But instead, she said something that changed everything between them, her voice rough from crying, but her words clear and devastating. "I've been punishing you for 6 years for not being there when I needed you, even though you didn't know I needed you. I've been holding on to anger and hurt because it was easier than admitting I missed you every single day. I've been protecting myself from you because I couldn't survive being abandoned again, and I was so sure you would abandon us once you understood how hard this was going to be. But you're still here. You fired a board member for us. You're sitting on this hospital floor at 3 in the morning holding me through a panic attack. You're making promises to a 5-year-old about her sister being strong. And I don't know what to do with that, because I spent 6 years convincing myself I didn't need you, and now I'm realizing I was wrong." Jackie didn't know how to respond to that confession, didn't know what words existed for this moment when everything was still so broken, but something was finally starting to heal. So he just kept holding her, kept breathing with her, kept being present in the only way that mattered, and together they sat on that hospital floor while their daughter slept in the room behind them, and their future became something neither of them could predict, but both of them wanted to try for. The next 3 days blurred together into a cycle of doctors and tests and treatment plans. Alice stabilized, the immediate crisis passing, but the diagnosis was permanent and life-altering. She would need regular monitoring, medication, lifestyle adjustments, and there was always the risk of another crisis. The weight of it crushed Althea in waves, and Jackie watched her oscillate between fierce protectiveness and devastating guilt, between determination and despair, And through all of it, he stayed. He didn't leave for business meetings or board obligations or anything else. He cancelled everything and stayed at that hospital with his daughters and their mother, proving with presence what he couldn't yet prove with words. Cheryl attached to him during those days in ways that broke and rebuilt his heart simultaneously. She called him Daddy for the first time while they were in the hospital cafeteria getting food Althea refused to eat, said it casually like she had been calling him that forever, and Jackie felt something fundamental shift in his chest. When Alice woke up from a nightmare on the fourth night and the first word out of her mouth was, "Daddy." Althea was standing in the doorway and he saw her expression crumble before she could hide it. Not from jealousy, but from the weight of 6 years collapsing under the reality that she had kept him from this, had prevented him from being the father their daughters clearly needed, had hurt all of them by trying to protect them. On the 5th day, the doctors cleared Alice to go home with medication and strict follow-up schedules. Jackie carried her to Althea's car while Cheryl held his other hand, and when they reached the parking garage, Cheryl asked the question that had been building through all those hospital days. "Daddy, why don't you live with us? Mama needs you." Althea's expression was unreadable, but she didn't immediately shut down the question, didn't tell Cheryl that wasn't how things worked, didn't rebuild the walls that had been crumbling throughout the crisis. Instead, she looked at Jackie with something vulnerable and terrified in her eyes, and he understood that she was waiting for his answer, because maybe, finally, she was ready to let him in completely if he proved he actually wanted to stay. Chapter 8. The Enemy Reveals Themselves. Alice recovered at home slowly, adjusting to her new medications and the restrictions that came with her diagnosis, and through it all, Jackie was present in ways that erased any remaining doubt about his commitment to his daughters. He rearranged his entire work schedule around Alice's medical appointments, learned the signs of potential complications from her doctors, researched treatment protocols with the kind of obsessive focus he usually reserved for business strategies. He stayed overnight at Althea's townhouse whenever Alice had trouble sleeping, or Cheryl was worried about her twin, creating a routine where the girls woke some mornings to find him making breakfast while their mother got ready for work. The domestic normalcy of it felt both surreal and inevitable, as if this was always where they should have been, but circumstance and choice had delayed them for 6 years. Althea watched all of this happen with an expression Jackie couldn't quite read, some mixture of gratitude and lingering caution, and something that might have been hope if she allowed herself to feel it. They hadn't discussed the future beyond the immediate crisis, hadn't addressed the confession she made on that hospital floor, hadn't decided what they were to each other beyond co-parents trying to survive their daughter's diagnosis. The tension between them was different now, less hostile but more complicated, weighted with history and pain and the question of whether they could rebuild something from the ruins of what they had been. Then, the mystery messenger who had been silent since the hospital crisis sent one final communication, and everything came into sharp focus. The message contained just an address and a time. 2 o'clock this afternoon, meet me if you want to know who documented everything and why. Jackie went without telling Althea, driven by a need to understand who had been forcing him to see every moment of her suffering and what they wanted from him. The address led to a small cafe across town, and sitting at a corner table was Dr. Simone Carr, looking nothing like the professional clinic director and everything like someone who carried secrets that weighed on her conscience. She had been the one sending messages, and her explanation was devastating in its simplicity. She had been Althea's doctor during the pregnancy, had witnessed everything, had been the one holding the camera for those videos Althea recorded in case she died. Simone told Jackie that Althea had made her promise to show him the footage if the worst happened, so he would understand what she had gone through and wouldn't blame himself for not knowing. But Althea had survived, and Simone had kept the videos and photos anyway, locked away for 6 years while she watched her patient rebuild herself into someone stronger but also lonelier, someone who didn't know how to ask for help anymore because she had survived the unsurvivable alone. When Jackie's former fiancé became a patient at the clinic and Simone learned his name, she understood immediately who he was, and she made a decision that went against medical ethics and professional boundaries. She told Althea that Jackie was going to be at the clinic, gave her the opportunity to orchestrate that confrontation, and then started sending Jackie the documentary evidence of what he had missed. Simone told him she did it because she believed Althea deserved honesty about what she had endured, because those two little girls deserved their father if he was willing to fight for them, and because watching Althea carry all that pain alone for 6 years while the man who helped create it lived freely had offended something fundamental in Simone's sense of justice. She told him the messages were meant to educate him, to make him understand the full weight of what Althea had survived, to test whether he would fight through the guilt and pain to get to his daughters, or whether he would retreat into easier options like felicity and corporate success. Then Simone handed Jackie one more piece of evidence, a video that Althea had recorded a year ago without knowing anyone would ever see it. In the video, Althea sat in what Jackie now recognized as Cheryl and Alice's bedroom, watching them sleep, and she spoke directly to the camera like she was speaking to him. She talked about the weight of lying to their daughters, about why they didn't have a father, about the guilt of robbing Jackie of 6 years with them, about the fear that she had made unforgivable choices based on pride and trauma and twisted logic that made sense to no one but her. She talked about missing him, about still loving him even after all these years, about not knowing how to fix what she had broken without exposing herself to more pain. The video ended with Althea wiping tears from her face and telling the camera, telling Jackie, that she was a coward who chose pride over truth, and now everyone was suffering for it. Simone told Jackie that Althea had no idea this video existed in anyone's hands but her own, had recorded it as a kind of therapy to process her feelings, and Simone had made a copy because she thought Jackie deserved to know the truth about how Althea felt beneath all the anger and armor. Jackie watched that video 3 times in the cafe while Simone sat across from him waiting, and each viewing destroyed him more completely as he understood that Althea had been hurting as much as he had, that she had missed him while he missed her, that they had both been trapped by her choices and his ignorance, and neither of them had known how to bridge that gap. When the video ended for the 3rd time, Jackie looked at Simone and asked the only question that mattered. Why show me this now? Why not earlier, when it could have made a difference? Simone's smile was sad, and knowing when she told him that timing mattered, that Jackie needed to see Althea's suffering first, before he could understand the depth of her feelings, that he needed to prove himself with his daughters before Althea could trust him with her heart again. She told him that the hospital crisis had changed something fundamental between them, that Althea's walls were finally down, and if Jackie wanted a real future with this woman and these children, now was the moment to fight for it, before Althea's defenses rebuilt themselves stronger than before. Jackie left the cafe and drove directly to Althea's townhouse, using the key she had given him for emergencies, and found her exactly where she had been in the video, sitting in Cheryl and Alice's bedroom watching them nap after their lunch, her expression soft and vulnerable in ways she never let him see when she knew he was watching. When she heard him enter and turned to see his face, she knew immediately that he had seen something, had learned something, and she stood up with her spine straightening into defensive posture before he could say anything. But Jackie didn't let her rebuild those walls. He told her he knew about the video, knew she had been lying about not missing him, knew she had been hurting as much as he had for all these years. He told her he watched her confession and understood that she was as trapped by her own choices as he had been by his ignorance, and maybe they had both made mistakes, but they had also both been trying to survive impossible situations in the only ways they knew how. He told her he loved her, had never stopped loving her, and if she gave him the chance, he would spend the rest of his life proving that he could be what she needed 6 years ago, a partner who stayed through hell without flinching. Althea stood there with tears streaming down her face and her hands clenched into fists, and when she finally spoke, her voice was raw with 6 years of suppressed emotion breaking free all at once. Chapter 9. The confrontation that breaks them open. Jackie Robinson and Althea Gibson finally had the conversation they should have had 6 years ago, except this time they were different people shaped by suffering and survival and the weight of raising daughters who deserved parents brave enough to tell the truth. Althea told him he had no right to watch that video, no right to invade her privacy like that, no right to see her at her most vulnerable without permission. The fury in her voice was real, but Jackie heard the fear beneath it, understood that she was angry because he had seen past all her carefully constructed defenses to the raw, wounded person underneath who still wanted him desperately despite everything. He told her she was right, he had no right, but he wasn't sorry because that video showed him the truth she had been hiding behind anger and armor for 6 years, and he needed that truth if they were ever going to move forward. She told him they weren't moving anywhere, that nothing had changed just because he had seen her cry on a recording, that she was still the same woman who had chosen to disappear rather than burden him with her dying body. Jackie's response was immediate and cutting. He told her she had no right to make that choice for him then, and she had no right to make choices for both of them now. He told her she was still doing it, still deciding alone what he could handle and what he deserved to know and who he was allowed to be, and it was the same pattern that had caused all this pain in the first place. Althea's response was volcanic. She told him he had no idea what it was like to nearly die alone, no concept of the weight she had carried raising their daughters through poverty and pain while he built his empire, no understanding of the choices she had made to protect him from obligations that would have destroyed his dreams. She told him about working minimum wage jobs while recovering from brain damage, about skipping meals so Cheryl and Alice could eat, about the night she spent in emergency rooms with premature twins and no insurance, about the years it took to claw her way to stability while every magazine showed him living freely and successfully and happily without her. Jackie listened to every word and felt them like physical blows, felt the weight of everything she had survived crashing over him, and when she finally stopped to breathe, he told her something that shifted the entire argument. He told her she was absolutely right about all of it, that he had suffered nothing while she endured hell, that he got to build his company and attend galas and move on with his life, while she hemorrhaged and struggled and survived alone. He told her he would carry guilt about that for the rest of his life, not because he could have changed it since he didn't know, but because she went through it without him when she should have had him beside her fighting with her. But then he told her something else, something that made Althea's furious expression crack into confusion. He told her that punishing him now for not being there then was destroying all of them, that holding on to anger about the past was stealing the future from their daughters, that maybe she had survived alone, but she didn't have to keep surviving alone because he was here now and he wasn't leaving. He told her that her strength was undeniable and inspiring and also exhausting to witness, that watching her carry everything alone was painful because he could see how much it cost her, that letting him help wouldn't make her weak or dependent or any of the things she was terrified of becoming. Althea told him the truth she had been hiding beneath all the anger and armor and protective fury. She was terrified. Terrified that if she let him in completely, he would see all the ways she was still broken from what she survived, all the trauma that lived in her body, all the moments she wasn't strong enough to handle alone but pretended she was. Terrified that depending on him would give him the power to destroy her if he left, and she had been abandoned by circumstance once and couldn't survive being abandoned by choice. Terrified that loving him again would undo all the healing she had fought for, that opening herself to him would expose her to pain she wouldn't survive a second time. Jackie's response was devastatingly simple. He told her he understood that fear because he felt it too, understood that trusting someone after being hurt required courage most people didn't have, understood that she had every reason to protect herself from more pain. But he also told her that their daughters deserved parents who were brave enough to try, who loved each other enough to fight through fear, who could show them that family meant staying even when things got hard. He told her he wasn't asking her to trust him immediately or forget what happened or pretend the past didn't matter. He was just asking her for a chance to prove he meant what he said about staying, about being there through everything, about choosing their family over everything else. He made her a promise that felt both natural and terrifying, told her he would give her a year of absolute consistency, a year of showing up every single day for her and their daughters, a year of proving through action instead of words that he understood what she needed. At the end of that year, she could decide if she trusted him enough to let him stay forever, and if she said no, he would respect it, even though it would destroy him. But he needed her to give him that chance, needed her to let down her walls enough to let him try, needed her to be brave enough to risk being hurt again, because the alternative was all of them staying trapped in this painful half-life forever. Althea looked at him for a long moment with tears streaming down her face and her hands shaking, and Jackie braced himself for rejection, for her to tell him it was too much too fast, for her to rebuild her defenses and shut him out. But instead she said something that changed everything between them, her voice rough from crying, but her words clear and honest and devastating. "I don't need a year, Jackie. I've been watching you for months now, watching you show up for our daughters, watching you hold me through panic attacks, watching you choose us over everything else. I've been forgiving you gradually, in pieces, every time you proved you were serious about staying. I didn't realize I was forgiving you until right now, until you stood here and told me you loved me and asked me to be brave enough to try again. The question isn't whether I trust you to stay. The question is whether you can handle what staying actually means." She told him the brutal truth about what staying would require. It meant being there when Alice had medical crises, when her PTSD flared and she couldn't function, when the weight of everything she had survived crushed her and she couldn't be strong anymore. It meant accepting that some days she would be angry at him for things that weren't his fault, that her trauma would manifest in ways that hurt them both, that healing wasn't linear and some wounds never fully closed. It meant being patient while she learned to trust him again, while she relearned how to be vulnerable, while she figured out how to be a partner instead of surviving alone. It meant accepting that she came with damage he didn't cause, but would have to help her carry, and asking him if he could do that, if he could stay through all of it without flinching or retreating. Jackie pulled her close and told her yes, he could do all of that and more. Told her that loving someone meant accepting the whole person, including their damage and trauma and complicated healing process. He told her that she wasn't broken, she was surviving, and if she needed him to be patient while she learned to trust again, then he would be patient for however long it took. He told her that staying wasn't about obligation or duty or masculine responsibility. It was about choosing her and their daughters every single day, choosing their family over easier options, choosing love even when it was hard and complicated, and required more of him than he thought he had to give. Althea kissed him for the first time in 6 years, and it was tender and careful and real, weighted with history but also possibility. She told him she was ready to try, ready to let him in, ready to build something together instead of surviving alone. She told him it wouldn't be easy, and she would probably push him away sometimes because old patterns died hard. But if he could be patient with her, then maybe they could create something better than what they had lost. Jackie held her while she cried against his chest, held her while 6 years of suppressed emotion finally broke free, held her while they both processed the weight of what they were choosing to try for. When Cheryl and Alice woke from their nap and found their parents holding each other in the hallway, they understood, without needing explanation, that something fundamental had shifted, that their family was becoming something different and maybe finally complete. Chapter 10. The reunion they built together. 6 months passed, and they felt different than the previous 6 years because Jackie Robinson finally learned what it meant to build a family instead of just existing in one. He moved into Althea's townhouse gradually, first leaving clothes there for convenience, then shifting his work setup to her home office, then finally giving up his hotel room and accepting that this was where he belonged. The transition happened naturally, without formal discussion or dramatic declarations, just the quiet accumulation of daily choices that said he was staying. Cheryl and Alice adjusted to having their father present with the resilience of children who had learned early that family could take different forms, and they tested him constantly in small ways that reminded Jackie of their mother, pushing boundaries, watching his reactions, making sure he meant his promises before fully trusting them. Jackie showed up for everything. Alice's medical appointments where they monitored her clotting disorder and adjusted medications. Cheryl's dance recitals where she performed with fierce concentration and looked for his face in the audience afterward. School conferences where he and Althea sat together and learned about their daughter's strengths and struggles. Ordinary mornings where making breakfast felt revolutionary because he was finally present for these small moments that made a family. The consistency of it was harder than he expected, requiring him to restructure his entire life around being present, but Jackie discovered that choosing his family over business obligations became easier each time he made that choice. Althea watched all of this happen with visible caution at first, her walls still partially raised, her trauma making her expect abandonment, even as Jackie proved daily he wasn't leaving. She pushed him away sometimes when her PTSD flared, retreating into the survival patterns she had built alone, and Jackie learned to be patient during those moments, to give her space while making clear he was still there whenever she was ready. The hardest nights were when Althea woke from nightmares about the hospital, about the delivery room, about nearly dying alone, and Jackie held her through panic attacks that left them both exhausted, but also somehow closer because she was finally letting him see her most vulnerable moments. They rebuilt intimacy slowly, learning each other again as different people shaped by suffering and survival. Their relationship wasn't the passionate romance it had been 6 years ago. It was something deeper and more complicated, weighted with history and forgiveness and the daily choice to stay even when things got difficult. They had their first real argument about 3 months in, something stupid about household responsibilities that escalated because Althea's fear of dependence collided with Jackie's desire to help, and they both said things they regretted before finally talking it through and understanding that building a partnership meant negotiating new patterns together. Alice had another medical crisis 4 months after Jackie moved in, nothing as severe as the first, but frightening enough to send them all back to the emergency room at 3 in the morning. Jackie held Cheryl while doctors stabilized Alice, and afterward, Althea told him that having him there made the crisis bearable in ways it wouldn't have been if she had faced it alone. The acknowledgement was small but significant, proof that she was learning to accept help, learning to trust that he would stay through the hard moments that would drive weaker people away. Cheryl started calling him Daddy consistently around the same time, abandoning the careful Jackie she had used initially, and the shift felt like acceptance in ways that destroyed and rebuilt him simultaneously. Alice followed her sister's lead weeks later, and hearing both his daughters say Daddy without hesitation made Jackie understand viscerally what he had missed during their first 5 years and why Althea's choice to hide them had been so devastating. But he also understood now why she had made that choice, understood the twisted logic born from trauma and desperation, and he had forgiven her for it even if she hadn't fully forgiven herself. One evening after the girls were asleep, Althea asked Jackie to come to her bedroom because she needed to show him something. He followed her with curiosity and slight trepidation, unsure what this meant, and watched her open a closet filled with boxes. Inside were years of accumulated evidence that she had never stopped loving him. Every magazine article about his company, every interview he had given, every photograph of him at events, all carefully saved and organized like she was documenting a life she couldn't be part of but couldn't stop following. She told him she had collected this material obsessively for 6 years, using it as both punishment and connection, torturing herself with evidence that he was moving on while also desperately consuming any information about his life. She told him about the nights she spent looking at these articles after putting the girls to bed, about the way seeing him succeed gave her something to hold on to during her darkest moments, even as it hurt her that he was succeeding without her. She told him she had been too proud and too scared to reach out, had convinced herself he was better off without her damaged, complicated presence in his life, and had used these collections as a substitute for actual connection because she was a coward who couldn't risk being rejected. Jackie looked at years of his own life documented by the woman he loved and understood that they had both been trapped by different versions of the same prison, He had been trapped by ignorance, while she had been trapped by knowledge she couldn't share, and both of them had suffered unnecessarily because fear and pride had prevented honest communication. He told her he understood, told her that collecting these articles wasn't weakness or obsession, but a different kind of love, told her that she had done what she needed to survive, and he couldn't judge her for that. Then he asked her the question that had been building through these 6 months of rebuilding. Can you forgive me for not being there, even though I didn't know? Can you forgive yourself for the choices you made? Can we finally move forward without the weight of all this guilt crushing both of us? Althea's answer was everything Jackie needed to hear and more. She told him that forgiveness wasn't a single moment, but an accumulation of small moments that proved someone had changed, that she had been forgiving him gradually every time he showed up for their daughters, every time he held her through trauma without judgment, every time he chose their family over easier options. She told him she had been forgiving herself in fragments too, learning that survival sometimes required impossible choices, and that she had done the best she could with information and resources she had available in moments of crisis. She told him she was ready, ready to trust completely, ready to build a future without constantly looking back at the past, ready to be a family without caveat or condition. She told him that staying through these 6 months had proven what promises never could, that he had shown her through action who he was and what he valued, and she believed finally that he meant it when he said he wasn't leaving. More than that, she told him she loved him, had never stopped loving him even when she convinced herself she had, and if he wanted to stay, she wanted him to stay not just for their daughters, but for her too, because she was tired of surviving alone when she could be living with him. Jackie kissed her deeply and told her there was nowhere else he would rather be, no other life he wanted to live, no other choice he would make if given the option. He told her that finding her again had been terrifying and devastating and the greatest gift of his life, that their daughters were everything he didn't know he needed, that building this family together was harder and more meaningful than any business success he had ever achieved. The next morning, Cheryl and Alice woke to find their parents in the kitchen together, Althea leaning into Jackie's chest while he made breakfast, both of them looking peaceful in ways the girls had never seen before. Cheryl asked the question directly with her characteristic boldness, wanting confirmation of what she already sensed was true. "Does this mean Daddy lives here forever now?" Althea looked at Jackie, and he looked back at her, and they both smiled with the kind of understanding that came from fighting through hell together and choosing each other on the other side. She told Cheryl yes, Daddy lived here forever now, and watched her daughters' faces transform with joy so pure it hurt to witness. Alice climbed into Jackie's lap and asked if this meant they were a real family now, and Jackie told her they had always been a real family, they just needed time to find each other. He pulled Althea close with one arm while holding Alice with the other, and Cheryl wrapped herself around both of them, creating a knot of arms and bodies that felt like home in ways Jackie had stopped believing were possible. He whispered against Althea's hair that he loved her, loved their daughters, loved the life they were building from the ruins of what they had lost, and she whispered back that she loved him too, had always loved him, would always love him. Jackie Robinson had walked into Lumiere Medical Center months ago and discovered his entire world shattered and waiting. Now, standing in the kitchen with Althea's hand in his and their daughter's laughter filling the air, watching Alice dance despite her medical challenges, and Cheryl grin with unfiltered joy, he understood that some families weren't born complete. They were built through crisis and forgiveness, and the daily choice to show up, even when it was hard, built through honesty about damage and trauma and the complicated process of healing, built through staying when leaving would be easier. He had missed 5 years of his daughters' lives and nearly lost the woman he loved because circumstance and choice and terrible timing had conspired against them. But they had fought their way back to each other, had chosen to forgive impossible choices and survive devastating truths, had built something stronger than what they had lost because it was forged through suffering instead of just inherited through circumstance. Althea leaned into him and whispered thank you, and Jackie understood she wasn't just thanking him for staying, but for fighting through every painful moment to get here, for being patient while she learned to trust again, for loving their daughters enough to endure her anger and armor until she could finally let him past her defenses. He whispered back that she had nothing to thank him for, that being here with them was privilege, not sacrifice, that every moment of pain had been worth it to end up exactly here. Their reunion hadn't been romantic or easy, or anything like the fairy tales people told about lost loves finding each other again. It had been brutal and honest and earned through consistent action rather than grand gestures. But standing in that kitchen with his family finally whole, Jackie Robinson understood that the hard-won reunions were the ones that lasted, because everyone involved knew exactly what they were choosing and exactly what it cost to get there.